In March of 2021, a single container ship ran aground in the Suez Canal and stopped 12% of global trade for 6 days. The Ever Given. 400 meters of steel wedged across a waterway the width of a city block. Photographs went viral within hours. A tiny yellow excavator parked beside the bow like a toy next to a mountain, as if one sandstorm and one ship had temporarily unmade the logistics of the entire planet. The response from markets and analysts was calm. Packages would be delayed. The ships would get through. And they did, in 6 days. The canal reopened. The backlog cleared. Committees formed. Reports were written. Within weeks, the story had become not a warning, but a reassurance. The system had proven its resilience. Now remove the word 6. Now make it not one canal, but every port on Earth, every shipping lane, every border crossing, every container vessel on every ocean, simultaneously. Not a grounding, a complete stoppage. Just 30 days. That is where this scenario begins. And on the first morning, parts of you will find it difficult not to think exactly what everyone thought in March of 2021. Temporary. The system will work. Here is the part that morning does not show. There is a name for what happened to Inoan Craze in 2021. He was the chairman and chief executive of Mattel, the company that makes Barbie, Hot Wheels, Fisher-Price, American Girl. Every toy a child in America wanted for Christmas that year passed through his supply chain. He had built it into one of the most efficient toy supply systems in the world. In 2021, that efficiency was not enough. What that meant in practice during a shipping slowdown, not a stoppage, a slowdown, is the detail worth understanding before this scenario goes any further. In November of 2021, Craze sat at a White House roundtable with President Biden, specifically because of what ocean freight congestion had done to the toy industry. Here is what it had done. Mattel had begun air freighting toys from Asian factories to American distribution centers because sea shipping could no longer guarantee holiday delivery. Air freight costs approximately 7 times more per unit than ocean freight. The company spent an estimated $100 million in additional logistics costs in a single fiscal year. $100 million extra for a toy company to get toys on shelves in time for Christmas. During a slowdown, a delay measured in weeks. Now remove the word slowdown. Now make it 30 days of nothing moving at all. That number, $100 million extra for a toy company to survive a partial disruption, is the number this scenario turns on. But here is what that number does not show. Trace it outward to every manufacturer on Earth, every food distributor, every pharmaceutical company, every retailer that moves goods across a border. Then ask what happens to that number when the movement stops entirely. Think about the last item you ordered online that arrived the next day. The inputs that assembled it touched 12 countries before reaching your door. The factory that made it was running on components sourced from 4 other countries. The packaging came from a 5th. The adhesive that sealed the packaging came from a 6th. None of those supply chains were designed for 30 days of stillness. None of them have ever been tested for it. None of them need to fail completely to cause the cascade. They only need to stop delivering on time. The United Kingdom imports approximately 46% of its total food supply. Not luxury items, not exotic produce, basic calories. Japan imports approximately 60% of its caloric requirements.
South Korea imports over 70% of its grain. These are not developing economies dependent on international food aid. These are G7 nations with vast financial reserves, sophisticated governments, and some of the most advanced logistics infrastructure on Earth. None of those reserves can purchase food that does not physically exist inside their borders. On day one of a global trade stoppage, their supermarkets look completely normal. By day 5, the specific gaps appear. But the food gaps are not the real story either. Not empty shelves, wrong shelves, particular items missing that were always there. The financial reserves of a G7 nation are not useless in this scenario. They can purchase food that exists somewhere and can be transported. What they cannot do is purchase food that does not exist or cannot
move. When the transportation stops, the equation changes at its foundation. But here's what nobody pictures on day 7. Day 1 looks manageable. Emergency communications go out from every major government within hours of the stoppage being confirmed. Ministers appear before cameras and use the phrase short-term disruption with visible confidence. Supply chain analysts note that developed economies carry buffer inventory. Corporate crisis teams calculate their days of stock. Markets dip, but hold. The mood on day 1 is serious. 30 days. The system will work. That is the tone of day 1. And on day 1, it is not wrong. Day 7 is a structurally different event. Modern manufacturing runs on just-in-time inventory, not stockpiles. Components ordered to arrive at the exact hour the production schedule requires them, measured in hours, not weeks. By day 7, the German automotive sector has consumed its buffer stock entirely. The semiconductor fabrication plants in Taiwan that produce approximately 90% of the world's most advanced chips have run out of specific chemical precursors that arrive by sea. The factories do not slow down on day 7. The production lines stop. A stopped line in Stuttgart means a stopped supplier in 7 countries that depends on that line for its next shipment. That is the just-in-time model failing exactly as its critics always said it would under sustained disruption. The cascade does not stop at day 7. Day 7 is simply where it becomes visible to the people running those factories, the analysts watching the markets, and the governments that had spent the previous week reassuring everyone the system would work. Day 15. The countries running the loudest internal alarms are not the island nations that everyone on day 1 had marked as obvious victims. They are Germany, Japan, South Korea, the manufacturing powerhouses whose economic models assumed continuous cross-border movement of goods as a permanent condition and never planned for its absence. That is the shape of day 15. Day 25. The word temporary has disappeared from official communications entirely. The question has shifted from when trade resumes to which sector gets prioritized when it does, which population gets fed first when food prioritization becomes a policy decision rather than a market outcome, and which industries get sacrificed so essential services can continue. These are decisions governments were not designed to make at this speed. The answers reveal what each government actually believes its economy exists to protect. They are not the answers any government had previously stated publicly. The financial system does not wait for day 7 to price in what is coming. Global merchandise trade totals approximately $32 trillion per year. 30 days of complete stoppage freezes roughly $2.6 trillion in goods already sold, already contracted, and already insured. There is a term for what happens when every outstanding insurance claim arrives simultaneously. General average. Every party sharing a disruption shares the cost. The marine insurance market, which covers approximately $600 billion in cargo at any given moment, has no historical framework for processing claims at this speed and this scale. Maersk, MSC, and CMA CGM, controlling over 60% of global container capacity, stop generating revenue on day one, while their combined fixed costs continue unchanged. A single vessel costs approximately $30,000 per day, stationary or sailing. Currency markets begin repricing every trade-dependent economy within the first trading session. The currencies of nations with large domestic food production move least. Everything else moves fast. Think about the last prescription you picked up at a pharmacy without thinking about where it was manufactured. Not the brand, the active ingredient. Approximately 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients in drugs sold in the United States are manufactured outside the country. Most pharmacies carry between 30 and 90 days of stock on commonly dispensed medications. That sounds like a buffer. It is not. The pipeline that refills that inventory stopped on day 1. The shortage does not announce itself on day 20. It arrives on day 31. Quietly. The order that was supposed to come simply does not. So here is the honest question this scenario leaves permanently open. The Suez Canal blockage lasted 6 days. 6 days produced expert panels, industry pledges about supply chain resilience, and a formal legal settlement of $540 million between the ship's owners and the Suez Canal Authority. 6 days cost an estimated $9.6 billion per day in delayed goods. And then nothing structural changed. The same just-in-time systems kept running. The same single-source dependencies kept existing. The same 12% of global trade kept flowing through the same canal that one ship stopped in 2021. When the Ever Given was freed, the world called it resilience. Here is what they were actually describing. The system had returned to the exact configuration that had allowed one ship and one sandstorm to stop 12% of global trade in the first place. Nobody changed that. Nobody was asked to. The Suez Canal was widened in certain sections. Ships were reminded to slow down in narrow passages. The rest of the just-in-time architecture that made one grounded ship a global crisis remained exactly as it was. 30 days would not be 30 times worse than 6 days. Day 1 and day 30 are not on the same scale. They are different categories of event entirely. Day 1 is a disruption. Day 7 is a failure of a model that was never designed for interruption. Day 15 is a crisis in places nobody was watching. Day 30 is a before and after line in the history of what the global economy was and what it became. The question was never whether 30 days would break things. The question is what you believe is preventing 30 days, and whether that belief is based on something that actually changed after the Ever Given was freed. Because nothing did. The ships kept moving, and everyone called that the end of the story. It was not the end. It was the system returning to exactly the same fragility. The question is when that fragility stops being theoretical.